Hi, in this video I'm going to show how to configure the walt.id IDP Kit to provision identity from Gaia-X Self-Description credentials and how to dynamically create and enable a verification policy to verify the credential data using OpenPolicyAgent and the Rego policy definition language. What you see here is the IDP kit from walt.id hosted on IDP Vault Test-Cloud. We have here the configuration documentation. What we are going to use in this tutorial is the mapping configuration to configure our custom scope to use the Gaia-X credentials instead of the default ones configured here for verifiable ID. And we are going to use the configuration for verification policies, where we are going to create a custom policy that will check the Gaia-X credentials based on a certain property. Now, in my test setup, I'm making use of this OIDC client TS project to simulate a client application that can simulate a login request via the OpenID Connect protocol. Now, to showcase how this sample application works, I have configured this application to connect to the IDP kit on our test deployment, and it will query for the scope, OpenID, and profile. And so in this case, it will just get redirected by our IDP kit, gets redirected to the identity wallet, where the IDP kit creates a presentation request from the wallet, where it requires, in this case, a credential with the type verifiable ID. Now the wallet recognizes this request and offers me to share the presentation of my verifiable ID credential. So I'm going to share this, and now when I end the sign-in request in this sample application, I can see that the application says the user is now signed in, and the data that I have here has been shared by the IDP kit, and it's taken from the credential, the verifiable ID credential that was shared by the wallet. So in the next step, I'm going to show how I will reconfigure the IDP kit to number one, query for a Gaia-X Self-Description instead of this verifiable ID credential. And number two, I will create a dynamic policy in the Rego policy language, which will be executed by the OpenPolicyAgent to verify the credential data. Now, in the first step, I have already prepared a Rego policy. This policy will simply query the credential, checking whether it is of type legal person, because legal person is one of the Gaia-X Self-Description credentials. And in this credential, I will check the credential subject and the legal address, country code, and this country code will be required to be in an array of allowed countries, and I will set the allowed countries, like you can see here, to the countries in the EU, so that I can make this a EU policy, meaning that only credentials will be allowed that have been issued by one of those EU countries. So to show you what such a legal person credential will look like, I have here an example that I have issued with the walt.id SSI kit. And in this credential, you see here the credential subject, and the properties that we are going to query is the legal address and the address country code property. And we will check that this value in the credential is inside the list of allowed countries. So first, in order to configure the IDP kit, if we are running the IDP kit on our local machine, we could make use of the command line interface using the configuration option for the SIOP manager. And here I could use VC policies, and this menu, I could use this menu to create a custom policy, much like this is shown here in this example using the SSI kit. But since I'm using the deployed IDP kit on our test cluster, I will instead show how to create this dynamic policy using the REST API of the IDP kit. Here I'm here at the idp.walt.cloud/API/Swagger. Here I have the Swagger interface of the IDP kit, and I can here, for example, query the verification policies. I click here execute, and it gives me a list of the available policies. So these policies are predefined, and I'm now going to create a new policy. And for this, I just click here on try out. Then I enter the name of the policy, which I say is EU policy. I just set these properties here to true to make it update and save the policy correctly. Then I will enter here a name for the policy in this data field. I will just skip the description, it is optional. Then I will set here the input data for the policy. The input data is what I have here in this command given with the -i flag. So this is basically the allowed countries property, and here I set the list of country codes that that are allowed for this policy. And I will just delete the other properties that I don't need in this case. So here for the data path, I will put, in case somebody is interested, how to configure the verification policies. You find it here in the documentation of the SSI kit, actually, where it says exactly what these properties mean that I'm entering here. So now I'm entering the data path, which is the path of the value that should be checked by the policy. And in my case, I'm just going to use $, because I'm just going to input the whole credential as the data to be checked by the policy. So back to the IDP Kit API. So as a data path, I will just input $, meaning the whole credential is used as data for the policy. And these properties I will just remove, so it takes the defaults. And here in the policy field, in my case, I will just put in the whole Rego policy that I have written in my text editor. I could also put in here an HTTP link if I have that links to the Rego policy, or it could be a path in the credential, like this. Then it would expect a property inside the credential that links to this policy. So in this case, I'm going to use this Rego policy that I have written here before, and I use this JSON escaping tool to get an escaped string. I'll just copy this string and I put it here into the policy property. And now using this API, I can create custom policy named EU policy. And it says here now return code 200. So it looks like that was okay. And now when I list the available policies, I have here a new policy which I've just created. This is the EU policy, and it will just take my Rego file and evaluate it using the OpenPolicyAgent. Next, I'm going to configure the IDP kit to actually make use of this policy. And to do that, I will edit my Kubernetes deployment, because the IDP kit is deployed on Kubernetes, and it requires these kind of configuration files in the deployment file. So the first one that I'm going to edit is the verifier config.json. In the verifier config, I have this property here saying additional policies. So here I can say I want to use an additional policy that should be applied on any credential that is checked by the IDP kit. And so here I write now policy EU policy, and I close this object here. I don't need any parameters for this policy because I have already defined it in the definition of the policy itself. And here I will now define additional mappings. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I will introduce a custom scope, an OIDC scope that the client application will use to tell the IDP kit that we want to use a different set of credentials. So in this case, for simplicity, I will just call this scope Gaia-X, and I define a claim name, and I will call it name, just like the one below. And then I say credential type. And here I will not request the verifiable ID credential, but instead I will request here the participant credential, which is one of the Gaia-X Self-Description credentials. The self-description consists of two credentials: the participant credential and the legal person credential. And then for the mapping, so which value from the credential I want to use, I say now value path, and the value path is in this credential, participant credential, we have a property named like this. So the credential subject that has legally binding name, and this binding name here is the name of the participant. And now I'm closing this. and I will introduce a second mapping. I put this in the scope Gaia-X. Then I just make up a claim name. In this case, I just say country. So this claim name is the way how the IDP kit will add this information in the user info object. It will appear under this name as a property in the user info. So then I say here credential type, and in this case I say legal person, then value path, and here the correct path to the value in this credential is credential subject dot Gaia-X participant legal address and address country code. So this is, you can see this here in the legal person credential example that I have, credential subject, legal address, address country code. That's also the one that we check here. And in this mapping, I have now defined a Gaia-X scope. So when the OIDC client requests the Gaia-X scope, and when it sends the OIDC request, the IDP kit will translate it to the claim's name and country, and it will know that it has to take the name from the participant credential and the credential and the country from the legal person credential, and so it will send sign-up request to the wallet, to the identity wallet, to share the legal person credential and the participant credential. So we'll see this in a minute. I will now apply this configuration change on my Kubernetes cluster, and I just say rollout restart the IDP kit, and then I just wait for the IDP kit to actually be restarted. And I can also follow the okay, so it looks like we have an error somewhere. So I had paused the video to identify where the problem is, and I think I have now corrected the error, and now we see here the log output from the IDP kit. So next up, I'm going to go to this sample application, the OIDC client, and I just leave the same configuration here, contacting the IDP kit on the Vault Test Cloud cluster. And instead of querying the scope OpenID profile, I will query Gaia-X instead, because this is the custom scope that I have just created. It has already rebuilt and restarted the application. I'm going back to this sample application here. I'll just reload the page, and now I say start signing up, and as you can see, I get forwarded to my identity wallet again. Here I enter my credentials, and now we can see that the IDP kit has created a new sign-up request. In this case, you can see here it was requesting a presentation definition. Here it was requesting the credential of type participant credential, and the credential with the type legal person, which is the ones that we have configured in our claim mappings. And here I have in my wallet, I have two credentials issued to my web did web, namely number one, the legal person credential, and number two, the participant credential. And both of those credentials will be shared with the IDP kit now. And if everything goes well, you can see now here that I have successfully signed in, and the information that was shared with the application as the user info properties, you can see here we have the name Delta DAO, and we have the country Germany, which corresponds to the mappings that we have configured here. Name from the participant credential, and country from the legal person credential. And we can also see here in the output, in the log output of the IDP kit, that it was verifying the legal person credential using the EU policy that we have previously configured. And we see here from the OpenPolicyAgent engine, we see the output true, so it has matched, and so the policy has been, the credential has been accepted, and the result has been returned to the client application. Thank you very much. This was my short introduction on how to configure the IDP kit with a Gaia-X Self-Description credential and an OpenPolicyAgent Rego policy to verify the credential data. Thank you, and see you next time.